my clock. My name is William Zarit, and I'm the Minister Counselor for Commercial Affairs at the Embassy, the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. We are in the presence of greatness with our friend Sydney Rittenberg. And for those of you who understand the term mensch, there's a picture of Sydney in the dictionary under that term. Truly a great person in a lot of different dimensions. So we're really fortunate to have had Sydney speak to us this morning and to be with us for the next few days. I am thrilled to be here, and I'm humbled by the challenge. I know that a number of you are probably more knowledgeable than I am about China, but I'm still very happy to be here and to share with you what I know, which might help you with your business. Now, let me real quickly, how many of you are doing business in China or with China right now? If you would just raise your hand. Okay, I'm going home. That's it. I'm done. So I'm feeling even more humbled. But again, I'm happy to share what I know. I'm going to try to, or I am going to, go through this presentation rather quickly because we want to have some time for Q&A. So let's get moving. This is what I'd like to go through today, and that is where we are with China, where we're going. Best prospects is an area I'd like to focus on, and then how we can help you with your business. China and world markets. I'm going to blow through this one, but I think it's just awesome to look at the percentage that China is responsible for consuming in world markets, whether it's coal, cement, steel, iron ore, internet use, mobile phones. It's an incredible number. Now, I know Sydney talked a little bit about the economy, 10.3% GDP growth last year, and our per capita GDP numbers are close, which when we're dealing with China, if it's in the same area, I'm very happy about it. So we've got 4660 as the per capita figure for China, and foreign exchange reserves over $2.6 trillion. Now, China now. Sydney also mentioned about the difference between the rural and the urban income. Now, these figures I have here are disposable income. They're not total income. Disposable income, and you can see from the graph that the gap, although both are growing, the gap is increasing. And I know that among many of the people I speak with in China, that this is an area of major concern. You know, when everyone was equal, everyone had the same, pardon my French, crappy housing, or the same blue Mao coat, that there was less dissatisfaction with the difference. Of course, the lifestyle is improving, standard of living is improving, but this is an area because it's improving not equally in the urban and rural area, that it is a major concern for the authorities. Some negatives, which Sydney touched on. Healthcare. 200 million people are uninsured, and as an American, I know that our healthcare system is not that great. But the Chinese have a long way to go. They're offering basic coverage, very basic coverage, but it's quite inadequate in education. Just one factoid, you'll see 77 million students of migrant workers. We don't know where they're going to go to school. So there are challenges. There are some excellent, there's excellent economic growth, and I just wanted to kind of balance it out with some of the challenges. Some of the other challenges, pollution, number one emitter of fossil fuel, took over from the U.S. recently. And unemployment, although the official number is 5%, We estimate it's actually closer to 9%. Now, that's kind of where we are. Where we're going. Now, China, partner or competitor, and I spoke with Mr. Rittenberg about this, and we had a discussion, and we agreed on the answer to this, which is in the next slide. And if we have any press in the room, you feel free to quote me on this. So it's China, partner or competitor, and the answer is yes. Okay? So you can take that to the bank. On the partnership side, I'd like to talk a little about the Chairman Hu's visit to Washington and Chicago, which took place in January, continuing the positive, cooperative, comprehensive relationship that President Obama and President Hu have agreed upon for the U.S. China relationship, and innumerable cooperative projects, whether it's in security, economy, social projects, energy, environment, and so forth. $45 billion in U.S. exports was a result of this visit. Well, of course, they gathered a lot of the exports of soybeans and other things that were going to be purchased anyway. But that's quite a significant number. And investment, which I'm going to mention a little later, contracts for $3.5 billion worth of Chinese investment into the U.S. Were mentioned during this visit. And we're going on to the next slide. Okay. Now, top 5 challenges for the coming years, and this is according to, I'm really focusing on the business side. Sydney really had a wonderful view of China writ large, covering more political, geopolitical, as well as commercial. Mine is very focused on the companies. So this information comes from companies that are active in China right now. And the top 5 challenges for the coming years: the bureaucracy, the difficulties working with the bureaucracy in China, the constraints on getting the right people for the right job for our U.S. companies, unclear laws and regulations in China, unclear regulatory interpretations, and the perennial bugaboo of IP rights infringement is still a problem and a major concern, and looks like it will be a concern into the future. Having said that, again, focusing on the opinion of U.S. businesses that are active in China, the vast majority expect to increase revenue. They are optimistic for the future, and they expect to increase their investment in the coming year. Again, the vast majority of companies reported revenue growth, that they are very profitable. And so with the challenges, there is a lot of very positive news business-wise coming out of China. Now, we look at some of the challenges with the healthcare, with the education, with the pollution, unemployment, and I want to, in addition, add to that, when we're looking at China, the trends that we see. Second-tier cities are becoming, or as we have here, newly emerging markets, are becoming an increasingly important market for U.S. companies. Of the top 14 that we at the embassy have chosen to work with, the top 14 second-tier markets, over 50% of U.S. exports go to these 14 newly emerging markets. Another trend is the middle class. You see 2009, and again, this is going to be a fuzzy figure. What determines middle class? But our economist friends have a calculation, and I just read what they tell me. And 2009 middle class was estimated at about 5%. By 2020, the estimation is somewhere around 45%. So the idea there is a per capita income of between 10 and 12,000 US dollars, and what that will buy. So you see the middle class is, the growing of the middle class is another major trend. Urbanization. Look at that figure on the bottom, on the left of the screen. By 2025, migration. I think it's somewhere between 160 and 200 million. But that's a lot of people who are going to be moving into cities, some of which haven't been built yet. So urbanization, another major trend in China. I'm going to go by the stimulus. Sydney mentioned the very effective stimulus that the Chinese put into effect a couple years ago. But I'd like to go right to the 5-year plan now. And this is another one of the major factors in where businesses should be going. And that is the 12th 5-year plan, which was just announced during the National People's Congress last week. So, economic targets, the GDP is predicted to grow 7% annually, and I think that's pretty safe since it's grown at a much higher level for the last 10, 15 years. The idea there is that the authorities in China are willing to sacrifice several percentage points of GDP growth in order to take that and put this into services and improve livelihood of the Chinese people. Inflation target will be 4%, and 45 million jobs will be created in urban areas over the next 5 years. 45 million jobs. Now, this is what the Chinese authorities want to happen, and usually the 5-year plan ends up happening. So this is the target. And for unemployment to be at or lower than 5%. Now, also in the 5-year plan, the 7 major industries or industry sectors that the plan will focus on. And these, you see them listed here, the new Magic 7: new energy, energy saving and environmental protection, biotech, new materials, composites included, clean energy vehicles, high-end manufacturing, and next generation information technology. Also part of the 5-year plan, economic restructuring. You see that Magic 7. Well, the target is for the percentage of GDP in those Magic 7 industry sectors is now 3%. By the end of the 5-year plan in 2015, it will be 8%. And the goal for 2020 is that those 7 industry sectors will comprise 20% of GDP. You see also under innovation, research and development funding will be going up 12.5%. That will be 2.2% of GDP for R&D for Chinese push for innovation. And a strong focus on the environment and clean energy. Funding for environmental protection is going to increase 10%. Energy consumption will be cut 16% by hook or by crook, which is often the case. Carbon dioxide emissions cut 17%. So Sydney mentioned the authorities in China are looking very carefully at what the people need, and from maybe a more cynical viewpoint, in order for those in authority to stay in authority so that it will satisfy the needs of the Chinese people. And this last slide on the 5-year plan, the livelihood is a major focus of this 5-year plan to improve the livelihood of the people. Affordable housing, you see almost 15% growth in affordable housing. And with the housing bubble that now exists in many of the cities in China, this is critical to have housing that the average person can afford. Minimum wage, someone mentioned that costs are going up in the Pearl River Delta. They sure are. And you can see the minimum wage will be rising 13% over this 5-year plan. The people want the money, they want to start spending the money, have the consumable income. Education and healthcare will also get healthy increases in spending. So, we've talked about the challenges, mentioned some of the trends, talked about the 5-year plan. And this all goes into our thinking for what we call, in our post in China, our best prospect industries. And I'm going to go over each one of these in order. So, renewable energy opportunities. By 2020, China is projecting that 15% of its energy source will be renewable energy. By that time, they're looking, well, at least 2030, 5% nuclear, 15% will be renewable, and the rest from fossil fuels. So wind energy is one of our best prospect industries, and solar power. Now, this might be kind of counterintuitive, as the Chinese export 90% of their production of solar energy technology products. But there are niches in this industry, and we already have some U.S. companies, especially in the thin film photovoltaic cells, that are doing very well in China. Green tech, again, Sydney mentioned that. And why is this going to be such a great industry sector? Well, that top bullet there, 20% of the water 50% of the water is undrinkable, but 20% of the water is not even suitable for industry. So water cleanup is a major priority. You see $300 billion through the year 2016 to be spent on water cleanup, whether it's rural wells, urban wastewater, or major water bodies that are heavily polluted. Coal is going to continue to be a major energy source for China as long, probably, as all of us here live, unless there are some incredible breakthroughs in other renewable and so forth. So 70% of the energy comes from coal right now, and the Chinese have enormous coal reserves. So the industry sector that a lot of our U.S. companies are looking at is the clean coal area, which will be increasingly important in China. Nuclear power, now that's gotten a little bit of a slowdown since Japan, as can be expected, but the Chinese will need nuclear power as part of the mix as their economy keeps growing. So over $100 billion invested in the 10-year period, and you can see 13 active plants right now, and this under construction, I think, is actually on the drawing board, not actually under construction. But I am sure that the Chinese will go forward with their nuclear power program after they've stopped things right now and are taking a look at what went wrong in Japan. And the U.S. is working very closely, very, very closely with China on nuclear safety. So I expect very soon that the programs will be going forward again. Smart grid. And I know some of you are already involved in smart grid in China. Chinese are spending $10 billion annually. They're outspending the U.S. on smart grid technology, how to get the power from the power source to the consumer in the most efficient way, and how to meter it, and how to not lose energy on the way. So this is a very important industry for U.S. business right now. Healthcare. 2010, 169 million people in China over the age of 60. By 2020, that will be 240 million people over the age of 60. Now, there's nothing magic about 60 years old. That doesn't mean that if you're 60, and I know none of you are 60, but you don't fall apart automatically. But the statistics are that there's more health care required for those over 60. China is the third largest medical equipment market in the world and growing at 15% a year. Now, this is an area that Sydney touched on in terms of restructuring the economy. So moving from an export-driven to a consumer-driven or a domestic demand-driven economy. When you don't have a good healthcare system, good insurance system, the Chinese, as they don't have, they save for the rainy day. And the saving rate in China is 40% of disposable income, which is, in the U.S., I think it's up to 6 now because after the recession. But in order for the Chinese to get more domestic demand, they have to provide the social safety net. And that is what they realize they need to do, and that's what they're in the process of doing. Clean transportation. Go down to the bottom there. New electric vehicle program. By 2012, the Chinese are shooting to have 60,000 electric vehicles on the road. U.S. companies working very closely with the Chinese on electric battery technology, which is going to be the key for all of this. So again, we're working very closely with the Chinese. Railroad and city mass transit. Now, this may not be intuitive since the U.S. rail is not necessarily a world leader. However, the U.S. does have leading technology in freight rail, and we're finding a lot of U.S. companies are very competitive in that sector. Also, as the Chinese continue to build out their high-speed rail network and their mass transit networks, we have a number of companies that have technology that the Chinese are very interested in, whether it's signaling or other testing, rail testing equipment. We've had some very successful U.S. companies in those sectors. Outbound tourism. Now, that's not you guys going to China, okay? It's our Chinese friends coming here. And right now, it's the 4th largest tourism market for the U.S. See, in 2010, 735,000 Chinese visitors to the U.S. projected. Now, this projection in 2015 is not, we don't expect 100 million tourists to come from China, but that is the projection of how many Chinese tourists will be going overseas. So we want to get a healthy share of that market. We calculate now that the average Chinese visitor spends over $6,000 per visit. So we're working very hard. We're working with Department of Homeland Security on the visa issues that in the past have kept a lot of Chinese from coming, and the visa process, which has kept a lot of Chinese from wanting to go through that process, which is a fairly demeaning process. But the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security have really made some great strides in improving that. We have an MOU with the Chinese on bringing tour groups to the U.S. So, major industry sector. Education is another one. Number one source for international students in the U.S. is China. And you can see the number of students grew almost 30% last year. Now, investment. No, this is not an export, but this is a major area that we in the commercial service are looking at right now in welcoming Chinese investment into the U.S. This figure, this $1.2 billion, is a little antiquated. The problem is we don't keep good statistics on Chinese investment into the U.S., but it's negligible compared to Chinese overseas investment in the rest of the world. The Chinese authorities have a go global policy, which is giving incentives for the Chinese to go overseas and invest. And what we need to realize, and I know most of you in the room probably do realize, the benefits to the U.S. of most types of Chinese investment. That's not investing in our T-bills so much, although that's keeping the government going and so forth. But greenfield or merger and acquisition to help maintain and create U.S. jobs. We have 2 programs. You see Invest in America, which is our outreach in China, which is really mostly to try to give our Chinese friends a warm feeling about investing in the U.S. in spite of a few setbacks that we've had in Chinese investment in the U.S. And the other is Access America, which some of you may be interested in which we provide to the Chinese U.S. service providers that can help the Chinese invest in the U.S. Okay, so real quickly, how we can help. We have a presence in 19 cities in China. We have offices in 5, Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenyang, and Chengdu. But in the other 14 cities, what we look at as 14 major second-tier cities, we have a relationship with, thank you, with the China Council for the Promotion of International Trade. So we can set you up with one-on-one meetings in those 19 cities. Market access and compliance. Someone's real popular with that phone. Isn't that great? Some things we can do for you in Beijing, as well as helping to promote exports and to promote investment into the U.S. We also have a policy shop in where we work very closely with USTR, Treasury, Agricultural, and State Department on a lot of different issues, and we help solve market access problems that you face, whether it's in pharmaceutical, medical device, duplicative certifications, or in obstacles to investing in wind power, bringing in your equipment in that area, or other industries. Import administration. Anti-dumping and countervailing duties. You may have heard about these that we have with our Chinese friends. It's contentious, but it helps to level the playing field between our markets. And that comes out of our section, Patent and Trademark Office. Now this is a slide, and this slide will be available online, so I'm not going to go over all of this, but I think for those of you who are looking to bring your technology into China, this is very important, and even if you're already there, it's very important for you to access the resources we have from the Patent and Trademark Office. We have 3 attachés in China, which can also be available to help you. National Institute of Standards. These are just 3 examples, areas where we're working with the Chinese to harmonize standards so that standards are not an obstacle to you doing business in China, which at the moment are an obstacle. So we're trying to improve U.S. business ability to sell to China. TDA, U.S. Department, U.S. Trade and Development Agency, which helps to facilitate. They're a government agency that actually gives away money, and they will give seed money to a project if there is strong likelihood of exports as a follow-up. U.S. Export-Import Bank, which is becoming increasingly active and increasingly efficient. The bottom bullet down there, you see, it's about a Pakistan sale, a locomotive to Pakistan. The significance is that the Exim Bank actually met the same terms that the Chinese Exim Bank was offering the Pakistanis. So this allowed, I think it was General Electric, to win the order for locomotives in Pakistan. So Exim Bank, if you were fed up with them last time you tried to work with them, go back again. I think you'll find them more responsive. And then we have the High-Tech Export Administration represented in China. This is high-tech export licensing, and if you have questions on that, we are available to help you. And that is my last slide. So now I know we have a few minutes, and what we want to do is see if any of you have questions, and I'll try to answer them. If I can't, then Sydney's going to answer it. There's a question way in the back in the corner.
Yeah, hi. Is this on? Thanks a lot. That was very interesting. Going back to your point about the growing concern about this growing discrepancy between coastal, urban, and rural interior China, And with China's relatively successful history of grassroots revolution, do you see coming volatile encounters in interior China out of frustration? And if so, what effect will that have on stability of exports and imports, both coming from here and coming to here from China?
Well, that's a great question. And Sydney alluded to how tight the control is right now, talking about the Jasmine Revolution that didn't exist or doesn't exist in China. We had some observers go out because we heard that something was supposed to happen. And we have these observers incognito. And really all there were journalists and secret police. And I think the mistake that our Chinese friends made, and they've been making a number of mistakes in their foreign policy as well, is that they roughed up the journalists. And they really went overboard. I understand how important it is to prevent a groundswell that would cause instability. But I think that what we have seen is that the security factions in China seem to be getting stronger. And I don't know if that's going to be long-term or if this is a blip. So that goes partly to your question, what's going to happen in the rural areas? The Chinese leadership still has a very tight grip, and although there have been a number of demonstrations in China which we don't hear about, small ones, usually about either the government taking away somebody's house and bulldozing it because they need it for eminent domain, or other issues with the government, maybe corrupt local officials. So there have been small demonstrations, but either the provincial leaders or the provincial governments will take care of the problem, which will help quell the demonstration, or the security folks will help quell the demonstrations. So I don't see that there's going to be a groundswell anytime soon. Of course, I also didn't foresee what happened at Tiananmen the day before it happened. So, but I just don't see that it will. And the government is really trying desperately to address these inequalities for the very reason that you mentioned. Does anybody else have a question? Oh, right here.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. It's very.
Oh, sorry,
me?
I guess somebody had a mic. And that mic is...
It's not good.
Oh, wait. Oh, here, I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am.
Can I speak?
Go ahead.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I'm from Johnson Johnson Medical China. I agree with you. There's a huge growing opportunity in China healthcare, but at the meanwhile, there's a big challenge. For instance, the SFDA reviewed a new product, very time-consuming review and approval process. Sometimes it's even longer than the U.S. FDA. And the medical insurance coverage, although it's growing, but still not enough, and the funding is small. At the same time, the NDRC keep cutting the price. They want to fix the price of the pharmaceutical product. So can you comment on what would be the strategy for the U.S. business doing the business in China healthcare and how to get the success?
Well, Johnson & Johnson, I'm sure, has a better strategy than I could come up with, but I'm happy to just share some thoughts on that. The Chinese State Food and Drug Administration is, as you know, terribly under-resourced, which is part of the problem. And I don't know if they're going to be able to address that very soon. I knew in some products, not necessarily medical devices, but more, even in cosmetics, that there was a total stoppage of approvals because it had moved from one ministry to another ministry, and they were just trying to get up to speed. In any event, that I think is going to be a perpetual problem. And as we found in so many other countries, that as the government tries to provide national health care, that they will squeeze the prices of foreign, especially foreign-made pharmaceuticals and medical devices. So I just look at what other companies have, or what companies have done in other markets, and a lot of that is, and I'm not supposed to really promote this, but a lot of that is local production, which I know Johnson & Johnson has been in China since the 80s, because my present boss actually used to work at Johnson & Johnson. So he used to wax rhapsodic about his days in China. So, I mean, that's kind of a simplistic view of how you're going to get around it. And I know that we do a lot of work in advocating in trade policy on trying to address the duplicative certification, which often takes, with AXIC and some of the other organizations, takes a lot of time. This is one way we have of chipping away at it, but it's going to be very challenging as national health care becomes more prominent. So I guess local production is going to be your answer, unfortunately. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
What advice would you give to somebody who's contemplating selling intellectual property assets like books, music to Chinese population?
Did everyone hear the question? Okay, could you repeat the question? Make sure that, is that on?
Is it on? Okay, what advice would you give to someone who's contemplating selling intellectual property assets like books, music, etc. to the Chinese population?
Yeah, the question, selling intellectual property, selling books, movies, music. I know that we are working very closely with USTR on trying to open up the market. The Chinese now allow only 20 films, foreign films, into China a year. And this actually is a violation of their WTO agreement. But the Chinese have told us, well, it's too sensitive. So they're not abiding by the agreement. So I don't know whether we're going to take them to the WTO for this. Probably. That's a longer term. In the short term, we see that the piracy of DVDs and CDs is basically continuing. So I don't know that there's a very good strategy right now, to tell you the truth. I think that our consultation with our intellectual property folks would be helpful, and they're working very hard, actually. The Chinese have excellent intellectual property regulations. The problem is the enforcement. Mm-hmm. And although we're seeing some improvement in the software area, and the government is actually now requiring government agencies to use legitimate software, which is a very good sign, since government is large in China. So there's some progress there, but still 80% of the software in China is pirated. I wish I could give you a better answer. You know, our intellectual property folks might be able to be more optimistic about that, and I'll hook you up with them, okay? I'll be sure to do that. Yes, sir.
What are the opportunities for selling to the Chinese government, and what's the procedure, and do you have any hindrances to selling to the Chinese government? Is it very difficult, or is it easy to?
Well, if you got what they want, it's not that hard. And I don't mean to be flip about that. You know, if the Chinese want that technology, and whether, then we get into IP issues. But it doesn't have to be. It's complicated. It's very complicated. And a problem that you'll see is that decision making is sometimes rather opaque And so you have to cover a lot of bases when you're trying to sell a product. And I think was mentioned in the previous session that the Chinese will tend to want to have you manufacture it in China. They'll take one example, one of many, and it's a big example. It's the high-speed rail. The Chinese brought in Japanese technology. They brought in European technology, which were the leading technologies in high-speed rail. And so the technology was brought in, and in order for it to get in other words, the Chinese wouldn't buy it. They had to, the Japanese and Europeans had to transfer the technology, which is often a requirement. And then the Chinese took the technology and they improved on it. And so now the Chinese are going overseas with their technology and competing with the Japanese and the Europeans in high-speed rail. This is a very typical scenario of how the Chinese, or one way the Chinese do want to build national champions, whether it's in rail, whether it's in high-tech, information technology, biomedical. And frankly, when I try to look at things from the Chinese point of view, frankly, I don't blame them for a lot of this, because why should they have to use somebody else's technology all the time? But that's not always so good for our companies. So frankly, if you want to sell to the government, whatever your product is, I would say you come to us first and we'll talk. And we'll be happy to talk with you about what the product is, what the market is, if you have a good shot at selling, and then how to go about it, whether it's the provincial government, whether it's the central government, the municipal government. There are a lot of layers. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. There's been some cases in some of the patent courts in China that have related to entrepreneurial Chinese companies registering patents in China that U.S. companies then had to fight for to get back. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
Well, you've described it, and described it very well. It's first to file in China. So if you have your patent here in America and you haven't filed in China, somebody in China can file there, the first to file, and then trying to get that overturned, trying to address that is very difficult. So the advice is file your patent in China. It's the system that they have. It's not pretty, and dealing with Chinese courts is very hit or miss. And if you should win the case, then there's the enforcement issue, which is still difficult. So you've described a problem that exists and that companies here in this room should avoid, if possible. Now, you file your patent or your copyright, you can still get ripped off. And so we talk to companies that are bringing in technology, and I'm supposed to, time. Okay, let me just finish this and we'll be done. And what for a larger company, we recommend you look at every single product and have a strategy for every single product. In the high-tech area, many companies will say, well, we'll just go in there and we'll sell the product and we're not going to worry about IP because in 6 months we're going to have a new product. And that's their strategy. Others say, well, we can't afford to lose this part of the technology, so this part of the technology has to come in a black box from wherever it is in the States and added to the rest of the product that is being manufactured in China, or however they're selling it. So there are different strategies for different products, but that doesn't really get over the problem of first to file, and even if you have filed, you can still get ripped off. Now that's not a very happy note to end on, and I don't mean to be downbeat at all, because U.S. companies, well, this is almost a tautology, the ones that are doing well, but a lot of U.S. companies are doing well, and they figure out a way to make money in this very complex market, and we certainly hope that we can help you find that way. So thanks for listening, and we'll see some of you a little later.